This is the podcast helping to create, provide, and expand
winners in life.
Positively life-changing experiences through music for all.
Go for it!
This is the podcast that encourages everyone to
break ranks.
Coming up on this week's Break Ranks,
music at Bands of America competitions is a little different than others.
We'll explore how music is judged at a BOA competition.
We try to approach it as positively as we can.
With one of Bands of America's chief judges, Richard Saucedo.
We try to be honest about what we're hearing because that's how we can help those students the most.
And we find out which aspect of music judging haunts show designers.
This is tough. This is the sheet that keeps you awake at night.
It's another episode full of great advice for directors and students as we break ranks. We had a full slate of 5 Bands of America regionals over the weekend, 2 in Tennessee, 2 in Texas, and 1 in Flagstaff, Arizona, which is where we began.
In first place with a score of 82.95. The 2024 Bands of America Arizona Regional Champion, the Edmond Santa Fe High School Marching Band from Edmond, Oklahoma.
That's Bands of America's Senior Director of Participant Relations, Cam Stasa, doing double duty as the announcer for the regional in the thin air of Flagstaff, almost 7,000 feet above sea level. But the high altitude didn't seem to bother a band from the Great Plains of Oklahoma, as Edmond Santa Fe swept all captions to come out on top in finals. Arizona's Catalina Foothills High School got silver in Flagstaff, and Mountain Ridge High School, another Arizona school, came in third. In prelims, Pinecrest Academy of Nevada Cadence took the Class A title. California's Covina High School won 2A. Foothill High School of Nevada took the medallions in 3A, and Edmond Santa Fe was the 4A champ. From the mountains of northern Arizona, we head to the Great Smoky Mountains and Chattanooga, and announcer Alex Quintero.
And in first place, with a score of 82.150, the 2024 Bands of America Chattanooga Regional Champion, the Dobbins-Bennett High School Marching Band from Kingsport, Tennessee.
Tennessee's Dobbins-Bennett High School taking the general effect and visual captions at Chattanooga and tying with Georgia's Lambert High School in music. North High School of Indiana was just over 2 points back in second, and Ohio's Lakota East High School finished third. Prelims in Chattanooga saw Georgia's Lambert High School win 4A, Dobbins-Bennett 3A, North High School 2A, and in Class 1A, it was Estill County High School of Kentucky taking the medallions. Next up, we head to the other side of Tennessee to Memphis, where Nick Costella had the results.
And in first place, with a score of 82.65, the 2024 Bands of America Memphis Regional Champion, the Bartlett High School Marching Band from Bartlett, Tennessee.
Bartlett High School from just outside Memphis was tops in music and general effect, with second place Arlington High School of Tennessee taking visual. In the class championships, Kentucky's Murray High School clinched the 1A title, Arlington won 2A, Tupelo High School from Mississippi the 3A champ, and Bartlett took 4A. All right, the last 2 regionals from the weekend were both in Texas. We start in the Mid-Cities area between Dallas and Fort Worth.
And in first place with a score of 87.6, the 2024 Bands of America Dallas Mid-Cities Regional Champion from Carrollton, Texas, the Hebron High School Marching Band.
John Pollard announcing a regional full of Lone Star powerhouse bands. In the end, it was Hebron High School from Carrollton, Texas, outdistancing Flower Mound High School by just 0.3 of a point to win in Bedford. Hebron claimed Best Visual and Best Music, while Flower Mound won General Effect. Coppell High School was third there at Pennington Field. In prelims, Hebron won 4A, Wakeland 3A, Argyle High School took 2A, and the Class 1A champ was Crum High School from Texas. And finally, we head to Challenger Columbia Stadium in Webster, Texas, the Clear Creek Independent School District. This is just off NASA Parkway. In fact, I could see the Johnson Space Center from the press box.
And in first place with a score of 86.6, 86.60, the 2024 Bands of America South Houston Regional Champion, the Pearland High School Marching Band from Pearland, Texas.
The Pride of Pearland surprising some with a win over a very strong Ronald Reagan High School of San Antonio. Bridgeland High School from Cypress, Texas was third. In prelims, West Harrison High School from Mississippi first in 1A. Friendswood High School wins 3A, and Reagan took the 4A title. This time on Break Ranks, we're going to do a follow-up discussion from an episode in Season 1. And I really encourage you, if you have the time, to go back to Season 1, Episode 3, a conversation with the 3 chief judges of Bands of America about the judging process, about how much they love being the number one fans of the units on the field, and a little bit about what they're looking for and listening for as they judge each band and give them a number that somehow has to fit in relation to all the other units that are performing that day or that weekend. And I want to continue that discussion in Season 2 here and kind of drill down on one specific part of this activity, one specific caption, as it's called. And so I've asked back one of the chief judges, Richard Saucedo, who's also the chief judge team leader, to talk to us today about music, about how music specifically is judged, not visual, not general effect, but music. Because Richard, I went back and listened to that episode in Season 1, and you said something that really struck me. You said the system really does work if everyone stays in their caption or in their lane. So we're going to stay in the lane of music on this edition of Break Ranks. Richard Saucedo, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Dan. Always happy to talk with you and be a part of this great program. Thanks for having me.
Out of a perfect score of 100, how much does the music caption in total make up?
Music at Bands of America competitions is a little different than others. A lot of places are 50% music, 50% visual. At Music for All, we are 60% music and 40% visual. And we do that just simply because we are a music education organization. And even though we are involved with competition, and folks obviously come to our events to compete, but they also come to learn and to get better as music educators. So we keep the focus on the music because we want to be there for the classroom teachers, the band directors, the folks that are constantly working with their students on a daily basis.
Well, I really do want to get very kind of granular about how each of these subcaptions is judged. But before that, help me understand that statement. The system really does work if everyone stays in their caption. What allows the system to work when judges do that?
Well, we have 7 judges, which I think a lot of people know, but some people may not know. 7 judges, and we have 2 judges on the field and 5 judges up top. On the field, we have individual judges, 1 for music and 1 for visual. And then up in the press box, we have music ensemble being judged. We have visual ensemble being judged. We have music general effect being judged by 2 individuals and visual general effect being judged by 1 individual. So what I mean by staying in their lane is if everyone judges their caption and doesn't worry about the other captions, the system works out well. For example, if a group is a little stronger musically than they are visually, you'll see different numbers that way. If they're consistent all the way across the board, the numbers will probably be pretty consistent. But it's also not unusual to see different numbers from the field judges than up top. Because again, they're listening to a much more refined and watching a much more refined picture than we are up top because they're right there with the performers. So there's a lot of things that go into the individual scores that those judges may put down. But if they stick to their category, and I'll just give you one simple example on the field, if I'm judging music performance individual, but I start looking too much at the visual aspects of things, then I'm really not doing my job. We want to take into consideration the visual aspect to make sure we're giving them full credit, but that's not our job. Our job is to recognize what's happening musically with those individuals and with small groups on the field, maybe even chamber ensembles. So we want to make sure and stay in our category. And that's what I mean by that.
I think you're kind of referring a little bit to like if a horn ensemble is there and they're playing a feature, but they're also doing a lot of body work at the same time. The music judge can they give them credit for what they're doing with their body while they're playing the music?
Absolutely. Yeah, we look at different kinds of challenges, and This came from our mentor and original Chief Judge Gary Markham, who unfortunately we lost a few years ago as he passed away. But Gary really wanted people to understand that when we're judging, we're looking at musical challenges, we're looking at environmental challenges, and we're looking at physical challenges. So if you're standing still playing something really well, that's an amount of credit. If you're playing something really well and you're spread all over the field, that's environmental challenge, and that's a different kind of credit, more so. And then on top of that, if you're doing physical work, like maybe you're doing choreography or something like that as you're playing, that gives you even more credit. But our bottom line is still to look at what they sound like, how they're doing as music performers, but we can give them a little bit more credit if they're facing environmental and physical challenges.
That's a great way to explain it. And gosh, we miss Gary.
Absolutely.
Let's go through these. As I say, there are three areas we're going to look at here: music performance individual, music performance ensemble, and then the two judges who judge music general effect. But we'll take them in order because that's how it is on the screen here for me. Music performance individual. This is the judge that is judging music on field level, as you said. As I look at this sheet that they're looking at and trying to assign a number from, we talked in the episode last season about what box 1 through 5 means, with box 5 being the highest level of achievement. There are two sides to this sheet for music performance individual. One side says tone quality and intonation. The other side says accuracy and technique. Just kind of go over those two things and what the music individual judge is looking at, listening to there.
Yeah, so if you're on the field judging music performance individual, you're basically checking out two different ideas. You're checking out how they sound. And by that, I mean the quality of the sound. And along with that quality goes intonation control, tuning, making sure they're in tune with those around them or in tune with the instruments they should be in tune with. Let's say they're playing a trumpet. Are they playing with what we call a characteristic trumpet sound? Or are there some issues with their sound? So we're listening for those kind of things. And then on the other side, we're looking at the accuracy and technique that they play with. You know, a lot of groups will play some pretty extensive rhythmic music when they're playing, and they'll have a lot of technique, maybe even to the point where they're doing some multiple tonguing and things like that. But regardless, we're listening for how they maintain good musicianship and good quality as they're doing this different technique. And if you look on the sheet there, Dan, it says accurate articulation methodology. That's basically saying, are the kids using their tongue correctly when it comes to their instrument? If it's a clarinet player, are they putting the tongue on the right part of the reed? You know, if they're a brass player, are they using the right part of the teeth, you know, with their tongue? Those kind of things. And we can tell a lot of those things just by listening to their sound and also watching them perform. But we're also listening for simultaneous responsibilities. And we talked about this a few minutes ago. If they're moving and doing a lot of physical or environmental challenges while they're playing a lot of technique and they do it well, that's pretty high credit. That's when you start getting up into that always category, that box 5 category.
Yeah. How close does a judge on the field have to be to hear that kind of thing?
Well, you know, we want to get pretty close, to be honest, but we also don't want to interfere with the performers. So we have to be careful about that. But we do allow our judges to go out on the field, and we feel that's important so that they can really listen to the individual players. For example, within the woodwind section, we don't want them just listening to the flutes. We want them listening even to the bass clarinets or the bari saxes if they're out there. In brass, we want them listening to the baritones and tubas, you know, not just the trumpets. And in percussion, we want them listening not just to the battery percussion that's out on the field, but we also want them listening to the front ensemble, the mallet players, and the folks that play those instruments up in front of the group too. So we get close enough that we can hear. And Dan, you know that nowadays a lot of groups are using microphones. They're amplifying things. They're using some electronic techniques, which are very cool. But on the field, music performance individual, we want to hear acoustic sounds. We're trying to get close enough that we can hear what the acoustic sounds are that these students are making.
Any other thoughts that you think parents and performers ought to know and directors ought to know about music performance individual?
Well, I think it's one of the most important things we judge because what we're doing, and I mentioned earlier that we're more about music education
Right.
than we are about competition. And as a music individual judge, we're out there trying to help the directors. We're trying to help them hear and see what's going on with their individual kids. And sometimes, and I was guilty of this when I taught, I would miss things. There were things that students were doing that I didn't notice because for some reason, I didn't get around to that student or just couldn't keep up or whatever. And so when we're making comments about a particular student's playing or a small group of students playing, we're hopeful that that's going to come back to the classroom and that director is going to be able to use that information to continue to improve the playing of their students.
That you do have a unique perspective in that you've taught at the high level of being the head director at Carmel, as well as being the chief judge for BOA now. So you're looking at it from two different places. What does a band director take from a music performance individual tape? How do they use that? For instance, would you let a student that that was that student being commented on, would you let them hear that comment?
Absolutely. And we tell our judges that these recordings that they're making are most likely going to be listened to by the students, not just the directors. So I think that you'll find that when we're making comments or if we're saying, hey, we hear a tone quality problem here, we don't feel like these mellophones are exactly in tune here. It sounds like there may be some harshness in their sound, whatever we might be talking about. We're saying it in a helpful way. We're saying it as something that they need to think about and something they need to work on, because if they do, their performance level will go up in general. And so we try to approach it as positively as we can. And very rarely will we call out an individual on the field. We might use the words individuals, or we may say some of our trumpet friends, something like that.
Yeah.
Very rarely will we call out an actual individual, but we try to be honest about what we're hearing because that's how we can help those students the most.
All right. Let's move then from the field up to the press box and music performance ensemble. The two sides to the sheet here are overall sound quality and accuracy, and then the other side, musical artistry. Explain those two.
Yes, this is, I think BOA, and of course I'm going to say this because I'm very biased, but I love the way that we adjudicate because I think that we really do cover all the aspects that can help these directors and their staffs when it comes to music education. And when you're up top, I've been fortunate enough to judge all these categories numerous times and have been yelled at by Gary back in the past for not doing it well enough. So I've learned a lot, about these categories. But for music performance ensemble, the judge is up in the press box and we're kind of listening overall to the quality of sound, the accuracy of the ensemble. And when we're talking about the ensemble, we're talking about the winds, obviously, the brass, the woodwinds, and the percussion. Now, there are two sides to the percussion, right? There's the battery percussion out on the field, but there's also the front ensemble, like your marimbas, your vibes, those kind of instruments. So we're judging all of that and listening to all of that. So if you look under overall sound quality and accuracy, you'll see the first thing is ensemble sonority, intonation, and tuning. I'm going to take just a quick second on sonority because this is something that I think groups can really benefit from coming to BOA, is learning how to create a sonority with their wind section. And that sonority means that when they're playing, let's say that the brass and woodwinds are playing this chord, this beautiful chord, it might just be a major triad, we actually hear some ring as they're playing the chord. We actually hear what we call overtones. And so there's this almost, it seems like they're being amplified without being amplified because they're so in tune, they're so well blended that we just hear what we call a beautiful sonority. It's a rich, warm sound. And so that's one of the things we're listening for. And if groups sound like that consistently, they're going to get a lot of credit. Balance and blend, or simply balance. Are you playing at the right volume based on what's going on? If you're a trombone player and you're playing an accompanimental passage, but you're playing it too loud and you're drowning out our flute and clarinet friends, then we're probably going to say, hey, trombone's easy, right? Because this is the flute and clarinet time.
Well, and that would also be where things like amplification and how electronics and artificial sounds are incorporated into the show, that would be considered there too, right?
Absolutely. And we are all for technology, and we're all for the use of electronics and amplification and those things. But if you're going to use those things, you have to almost treat it like another instrument. It has to be balanced. And in terms of blend, we've all heard groups where an individual is sticking out, right? So if a trumpet player is sticking out, it just simply means they're not blending. All right. So you can see already in just those two little bullet points how folks are getting credit up there. Again, we talk about the methodology, the way that they're tonguing. We talk about vertical alignment, which simply means, are they together? Are they playing together? Are they interpreting rhythms the same way, or are they not? For example, if we have a rhythm being played, dee da 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 dum, but someone right next to that individual is going dee da 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 dum, that's different. So it's a different interpretation. So we want to make sure that the interpretation is similar or exactly the same. And then again, Dan, like we saw on the music performance individual sheet, there's our comment about musical, environmental, and physical challenges. Because if the ensemble, including the percussion, are doing those things we're talking about in those first few bullet points, but they're also in a situation where they're dealing with some environmental challenges. And I'll give you one example. Let's say that our brass section is over on what we call side one of the field. So if you're an audience member and you're looking at the field, that's the left side of the field.
Yep.
Let's say that the brass are over there, but the percussion are keeping tempo on the other side, side two. So there's a distance there, which means, as we all know, there's going to be some kind of time lapse there. So the percussion are going to play, but the brass are probably going to hear them a little later than what they're actually doing, right?
Right.
So if they can stay exactly together, that's an environmental challenge. And as a judge, if we hear them play exactly together, that's major credit. Then on top of that, if they're doing some choreography, that's even more credit.
And for the audience to understand, that is enormously difficult to have that backfield player be in total sync with the front ensemble, which is right there on the edge of the field at the front in front of the audience. To have that all arrive at the same time is incredibly challenging, isn't it?
Yeah, you could not be more correct. And it is one of the most frustrating things to do as a band director.
Yeah.
To get the sound up to the audience at the same time when people are spread over 100 yards.
Yeah.
It's absolutely tough to do. And, parents, I think, sometimes need to realize that some of these kids that sound so good out on the field are actually playing ahead of what they're hearing. They might be hearing a beat, a tempo, but they're actually staying almost a half a count ahead of it so that it comes out in time to the audience.
Yeah.
So what we're teaching these students to do is actually pretty amazing. And the BOA ensembles, the kids in those ensembles do it pretty well.
It's a great perspective. It's like light from a distant star because they're playing in the future from the back of the field so that sound arrives at the same time.
Absolutely.
That left side of the music performance ensemble sheet is kind of the mind and body side of the sheet.
Yep.
I think of the right-hand side, musical artistry, is kind of the heart side of the ensemble sheet. Musical artistry, is it what it sounds like it is?
It absolutely is. I heard a saying years ago that has always stuck with me. A director I heard in a clinic, he said, music either comes from somewhere or goes somewhere. It never just is. And I still think about that. I'll use that when I'm talking to our judges. We want our kids to learn to be expressive and to play with interpretation. If they're playing styles, for example, if they're playing jazz, we want them to really understand jazz style. But different styles require different types of interpretation. If you're playing something that is considerably straight style, you may hear rhythms like dee, da, dee, da, 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 right? But if you're playing a jazz style, all of a sudden we may hear students trying to go do, ba, do, da, da, da. Totally different style. And as you know, Dan, you've heard groups like I have for quite a while. Groups play a lot of different styles. And so what we're asking is, how are they handling the interpretation of that style? Is it clear? Is it uniform from player to player? Are they expressive? Just simply as if they're playing a melodic line, are there rises and falls in that melodic line? Or are they playing every note at the same volume? Because if they're playing every note at the same volume, that's not music coming from somewhere and going somewhere, right? And you can also see phrasing, musical inflection, and that's basically saying exactly about what I just said. Direction of musical line, and rise and fall in the line just to make it more expressive. And we've all heard some groups play beautifully on the field, right? To the point where we get goosebumps in their ballads because they're so expressive. It almost brings you to tears. I still remember, judging a few times and being brought to tears by some of these kids that were playing so musical out on the field. We want our students to learn to be artists. We want them to learn to be musicians. And so this side of the sheet, I believe, is as important as anything that we adjudicate.
When you're talking to a director, say in one of the Sunday critique sessions that sometimes happen after regionals, when you're talking to a director, and I bet you've heard them say, I try to get them to be more expressive, but they just won't loosen up. What advice do you give that director?
What I do, and I'm sure there are other judges in our activity for BOA that would say it better than I do, but what I say is that we need to give them permission to do that. If you had a student, this may sound kind of silly, but I want you to think about it. If we had a student that we were trying to get to play a solo and trying to get them to play with great musical artistry, I bet if they were in their bathroom with the door closed, and you know how if you play or talk in your bathroom, Dan, you know how you hear this echo, right? You hear this kind of ringing of your sound.
Yes. Yes. Why people are bathroom singers.
Exactly, right? Because it sounds better than they really do. Okay, so we're trying to get our students to have that kind of confidence in front of an audience. And it's tough for individuals a lot of times, but they need to be told, and I say this to directors, they need to know that their music ensemble is a safe zone, that they can make a mistake or maybe overdo an interpretation or not do it quite enough and get some kind of comment about you need to do this better, but also know that they're getting support from their colleagues and from the directors to help them be better. But you know what? You make a really good point, Dan, because this is tough for kids to do a lot of times. And there are numerous times that we'll say when we're judging to a soloist even, wow, you sound amazing. Just do a little bit more expression for us, a little bit more nuance, a little bit more detail in the rise and fall of the line, and then you'll really have this down. So it is tough sometimes.
All right, let's move on to maybe the hardest caption and subcaption to get your head around, and that's the concept of general effect. And we go over it in broader terms in season 1, episode 3 again, keep referencing that. But we want to just look this time at general effect music. As Richard said, there are 2 GE music judges, both in the box. Richard, they're judging the exact same sheet, right? They're looking and listening to the same things.
That's right.
Okay.
And we want to get both of their opinions, so it works out pretty well for us.
Okay. Let me look at the 2 sides of the sheet here. It's interesting. There's something in common right there in the subtitles of these 2 sheets. On the left-hand side, effectiveness of the musical repertoire. And then on the right-hand side, effectiveness of the musical performance. So effectiveness is general effect, right?
Right.
That's in the root of what they're looking at here is how well the band communicates the idea.
Absolutely. And there are 2 types of that communication, and you use the perfect word for general effect, Dan, with the word communication. The music, the repertoire, as it's written, we're hoping is written in a manner that it will help the performers create effects, create emotion. You can see an appropriate range of expressions, pacing of effects, the use of time. We all know that how we go through time with our performances is so important because we've all watched or listened, right, to groups where we kind of lose interest for a second. But then we've also watched those groups where we're on the edge of our seat the entire time. It's like watching a great movie, right? Where you're on the edge of your seat because they keep you there. They keep you involved. And so the way they use creativity, the way they use pacing, the way they stage the different elements on the field, the continuity and the flow of the musical ideas, right? And what they do with the written score of the music helps to create that effectiveness. And then on the right side, that effectiveness of the musical performance, we're asking the students to bring that repertoire to life. Because as everyone can imagine, you can have the best score written for you possible. But if you don't communicate it to the audience through your playing, it's not going to come across as the greatest score. So our students have to be, they have to learn how to communicate to the audience, this musical intent. And especially, I use a lot when I'm judging emotional variety. I think the shows that are the most interesting are the shows that have different kinds of emotional variety. Again, just like a movie, right? There are moments that make you cry. There are moments that make you laugh. There are moments that blow you away. And we're hoping that the students understand the music enough. And that, of course, is the staff's job and the director's job, is to help them understand that so they can communicate that music to the audience and do it in an artistic way, do it in a way that captures the audience in a way that they're on the edge of their seats. And you see that word involvement there. It's the last bullet point. Some people say, well, why is that there? It's there because we're asking how involved are the students in communicating their musical performance? Are they totally involved? Are they maybe occasionally involved? So I love judging this sheet. A lot of people do not love judging this sheet because it's tough to do. And then a lot of people, if you went to the audience members right now, I'm sure you would get 20 different opinions at least about what general effect is.
And they would ask you probably as well, does that audience response to a show affect a general effect score? Because I get asked that a lot.
Yeah. And, that's a great question. Now, you would think that if an audience is reacting, right, to something, then a judge would probably react to it also.
Yeah.
We just have to remember that the judge has a little bit more background knowledge about what's actually going on in the score, what's being involved with the student's performance. And so they can take some of those things into effect or into account a little bit more maybe than a general audience member. Although I will tell you, Dan, if you see an audience really reacting to something, and we have some of the smartest, most intelligent audiences in this activity that come to BOA events. They know what's going on. And as a matter of fact, a lot of them will show you. They've come up to me and they said, look, Richard, I had all those groups in perfect order. I could judge. They say that. They say that to me all the time. And a lot of them know. A lot of them have been around so long that they know how this works. But if the audience is affected, the judges are probably affected in the same way. The only thing that I would use as an example is if a group continually, and I'll never forget this because I was judging drum corps years ago, and a group played for us and everything they played was loud. And the audience just kept going crazy, crazy, crazy over the loudness. But as the show went on, they went a little less crazy because they had heard that volume so often. And I didn't have that particular group up in general effect. And they yelled at me when we got into critique and said, did you not hear the audience? I'm like, I absolutely heard the audience. And they got softer all the way through your entire show because you kept doing the same thing.
It's supposed to go the other way.
Exactly. So there's all kinds of aspects to this. I think it's so fun to adjudicate this sheet. But for a director and for a designer, this is tough. This is the sheet that keeps you awake at night. How do we satisfy all these different things for the judges so that our kids are successful? But like I said, all three of the music sheets that we use, I think are so effective. I'll use that word. I think they're so effective at helping the band director in the classroom, helping staff members, whether it's a woodwind player, a percussionist, a brass player. Adjudicating this way can really help those students and can help their teachers continue to improve as well.
I wanted to give you just a chance here at the end to talk a little bit about Gary Markham a little bit more and about how he really helped shape, especially the music side of how our activity is judged. Who was Gary Markham and what was his impact on judging in Bands of America?
Gary Markham, I would say, I'll try to do this without getting emotional. Gary was probably one of the most influential people we've ever had in our activity, whether it's band, concert band, drum corps, marching band, whatever. His passion for this activity was unparalleled. He wanted BOA, DCI, all of it. He wanted it to be the ultimate experience for students. And, he was a great band director for years, had wonderful concert bands out on the East Coast. And when we got him in the BOA arena, and he started to say, here's what we should do, all this stuff. I had the great fortune of, before I took over as the team leader, I was kind of his assistant for a few years. So I got to follow Gary around and look at how he did these things. And I was always amazed at how he had the answer for everything. Anyone that would come to him with any kind of question, he would be able to say, you got to think about this, you got to think about this, you got to think about this. And probably one of the things that Gary taught us all is that if you're going to evaluate a group, you have to evaluate by saying how many individuals in that group are doing something. Is it one or two people that are doing it a lot? Or is it a small group that's performing a lot? Or is it the entire ensemble that's performing a lot? And if it's a lot of just soloists or small groups, maybe that's not the same credit as more people creating some of the effects, more full ensemble type things. So he taught us, and he called it the hierarchy of challenges, how many people are involved. And he taught us that way to learn how to really evaluate groups fairly. And he also taught us a lot about how to evaluate in terms of environmental challenges and physical challenges. He said, you cannot just talk about how they play. You got to talk about what they're doing when they play. And I think that he left so many great things. We still haven't, Dan, we haven't changed the wording in so many things that he's written. We still hand them out to our judges and haven't changed a thing because it's still perfect for what we do right now. And the fact that we have so many groups signing up for BOA, you got to thank Gary for a whole lot of that.
The legacy is just amazing, as are you. And I just wanted to say to fans who are listening to this, if you ever have the opportunity to have an extended discussion with a Bands of America judge, it's going to be one of the most fascinating discussions you ever have. I love talking to judges and especially talking about all of these different factors that they have to consider as they evaluate a student's performance and the show's composition. Richard, thank you for another fascinating discussion. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Dan. Thanks so much for having me. And I want to thank real quickly before we go, obviously, John Phillips and Nola Jones, who are my patriots in all of this judging thing. And we make such a great team. And so I have to thank them for everything that they do because they make me better every day.
The team leader of the Bands of America Chief Judges, a member of the Music for All Hall of Fame, and the former head band director at Indiana's Carmel High School, Richard Saucedo. This week, catch the bands performing at BOA Regionals in Vestavia Hills, Alabama, Conway, South Carolina, Moscow, Idaho, and Prosper, Texas. Until then, go for it. Break ranks.